So actually, it's quite nice to be on this stage because it's quite cold in this hall. But here, because of the lamps, it's kind of warmer. So if you want to get a bit warmer, come on stage and give a session. So let's talk about localization. Yesterday we have seen already that even in this hall we are from many countries. We probably speak dozens of languages here, and that's just a small snippet what we are here. So there's nothing more global than the internet. So we have to think about localization, and that's not as simple as it seems. But to start, it's simple, especially with Orchard, because we have a quite complete toolbox. It's not perfect, but quite complete. So use it because it's very useful. Just a little bit about me. I also go by the name Piedona, by the way, on the forum. So if you got some help by Piedona, then it was me. Or if you are using a module that's namespace is prefixed with Piedona, that's also by me. I'm one of the core contributors of Orchard for a bit of a time. I co-founded Orchard Hungary, the Hungarian Orchard site with Benedek. And as you have heard, I also co-founded Lombik. And we started Orchard Dojo with Lombik, our training and Orchard learning site, not long ago. So what is localization and what should we do? Why should we care about localization? First of all, as you may all know, localization is not translation, not just translation. Translation is turning text from one text into another language. But localization is more. If you want to localize, and that's what we do in Orchard, you have to think about the cultural differences as well. So here we speak about localization. That's not translation. It could include translation, but not necessarily. We are speaking about different cultures. For example, in the UK and in the US, they both speak English, but it's a different culture. It's a different local. And you may want to think about this when you are targeting your website. Of course, you need to know your audience. But if you know your audiences in the different locals, you have to think about the cultural differences as well, besides having the different languages. Let's first talk a bit about how to approach the question of localization if you don't have anything. And since we are talking about Orchard, let's see how to do it in Orchard. First, the interesting question is that when you localize something, you basically create another version of your site, but you have to keep to conventions and standards. It's an interesting question. When we approached the Hungarian localization with Benedek, we faced the problem that we are now creating basically technical terms and the technical language. So when we localize Orchard's UI, we have to think about in that way about that people from now on will use those expressions what we create, and that's quite a responsibility. When we started our university course last year, it was quite funny to hear back those expressions what we created. It seemed a bit strange, but I think we did a decent job with that. But think about that you are creating a technical language when you localize the UI of Orchard. So it's not as simple as it seems. Now there's also the question what to translate out of the strings, especially because of this technical terms. For example, do you want to translate content part and content type? We decided to translate it because content type, content part doesn't sound very well in Hungarian. And neither content, neither part, neither type, neither of these words are common as technical terms in Hungarian. But that's not the case, for example, with blog and widgets. You may not want to find a version of these words in your own language or in the other language, because widget and blog are quite common. So why translate blog? Everybody knows what a blog is. And there are other issues as well. These are now a bit technical, but still very well connected to the human side of translations and localization. Because in some languages, also in Hungarian, in German, I know, there are different types of speaking to someone by you. There is an informal one and a more polite one. Now, this is not handled by Orchard. This is something you have to handle outside the application. We kind of lack a proper solution for that. I created a modification to the online localization translation tool, what I will show you shortly, that allows you to add a second string with a different type of view, but it's not yet up, not yet online. We still have to solve that. But for now, we have gone with polite, because polite is okay. People won't get offended. So that's probably the solution for now. First of all, what do we want to localize? I've talked about UI for now. That's probably what you want to have all the time. And there's content. These are two different things, very different how to approach in Orchard. So let's see what to do with them. First of all, about UI. We have this nice online localization tool. If we go to the Orchard website, and I have internet connection, so great, I bet you all kind of know this menu item here, translate. If you don't know, please look at it now. These are all the localizations Orchard currently has. You can see there are quite many. If you look at how many strings are actually translated, the picture is a bit worse, but not bad. There are some complete translations, complete localizations, like French, for example. Pretty much all the strings localized. Hungarian, Swedish, Russian are all quite complete. Now, if we want to have our UI localized, we have to download a localization package. So I will go by French because of it's being complete. When you open this localization page on orchardproject.net, you will see all the strings that are localized, all the strings that are available, grouped by root namespaces, pretty much. You see that we have root and core, but we have things like Bing Maps, contrib.cache. So it's not just core Orchard. You can have localization with the same tool for third-party modules as well, if they are open and publicly available. If you want to contribute to the translation, you can just register on the Orchard website, drop Bertrand or now even Benedek's email, and they will enable you to access your translation. So I can't edit the French translation, but I can edit the Hungarian one. So if you have the permissions for that, you will see the editor, what we see here. So you see we have these nice edit links. So that's probably a bad example of translation. You see the dash, 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 dash is the same in Hungarian as in English. We probably have the same roots of the language. But here is a better example. So it's just original string, localized string, nothing complicated. But let's go back to the French version, and I will download the package and install it. But first is download, so go back to the French one, download PO files, because Orchard uses PO files for localization. We will take a look at them. They are nice, simple, ordinary text files. So I've downloaded this package, so let's take a look. to, for example, let's go to the root. So I will now open app data, what's here in the root. That will go to the root app data of your site if you install this localization package. And if we go inside the local, whatever, we will find the PO files. You see, it's quite simple. It's quite human readable. Let's take a look at, for example, this. These two lines are just comments. Now here we have this message context. This is the namespace where the localization lives, where this string lives. So you can have the same string, the very same string, translated to different strings if they are used on different places. Message ID is just the original string, and message string is the localized string. Quite simple. You can even give that, hand it out to non-Orchard professionals, non-technical people. They kind of get a grasp of it quite fast. But how this works, how you can fetch these strings, we will see in like 5 minutes. But first we have to set up our site, because now we have the localization package. That's great, but how to install it, how to tell Orchard what to local to use, whatever. So we have to go back, or we have to go to our Orchard site. I have it started here. This uses the default US local, so let's change it. I go to the dashboard, and under General Settings, you have the site culture settings. So it's pretty straightforward. Only NUS is available, but we can add more. So let's go under Add or Remove. And here's already French selected. You can see there are all the standard locales. But let's select French, Add. Now we have French available. So if I go back to Manage Settings, I can now select French. So if I do that and hit Save here, nothing changes. Of course, nothing changes because the localization package is not yet installed. So let's do that next. There's a tool for that. It's maintained by Bertrand. It's called Translation Manager. It's part of the Vandelay Industries module, but sadly, with the current version of Orchard, it's broken. So you can't use it because it uses some outdated zip library, if I'm correct. But installing the translation package is quite simple. You just have to copy-paste the folders over. Now, it's not quite perfect, as we will see. So here I have the translation, the localization package. I will go back to the root of it. I go to the Orchard solution, and I will just drop the localization package over the orchard.web folder. And it just copies over. Now, every module that's available localized in this package will have localization. But on the downside, every module that you don't have installed but still has localization, it will have a superficious folder. Because, for example, when we open our modules, here we have the localization for Bing Maps, although I don't have the Bing Maps installed. Yeah, so that's what Vandelay Industries should solve, but not here. But Bertrand promised to fix it, so we will see the fix probably tomorrow. So let's go back to our site and see what happened. We should see everything now in French. And that's great because I don't speak French, but we have some people who can help me here if I get lost. But I won't, because I already know the URLs. All right, so we now have the localization. That's great. The package is here. What else do we? What else should we know? We have this localization package, with all the strings in the PO files, but how can we fetch these? How module developers can use these strings? Luckily, we have a very simple concept, a very simple API for that, and these are called T-strings. So let's see what T-strings are. If we go back to our code, I have a very small demonstration here, a very simple code. It's just a controller. And that's how you use localization, the localization API of Orchard. You have to inject a localizer. We commonly, or no, not commonly, we should have that localizer in a public property because it's property injected. It's the same kind of dependency injection we have throughout Orchard. We commonly fill that up in the controller from this new localizer. It's just a placeholder, a kind of placeholder, not to have no reference exceptions if we want to use that T prematurely. By the way, the T is just a convention, so I could name this property anything, but T is short. We all know what it is, so let's use T. And if you run a string through this T method, through this T delegate, it's automatically localizable. So here I have this string, and it's localizable. So we should be able to localize that from a PO file. You see that we also have arguments. So this T method has it actually has one overload or one version, but the second parameter is an array of arguments. So what we have here is an array of arguments, parameters, that you can fed to that string. Because what's the issue here? If you have some part of the string that should change depending on the context, like when you are displaying the number of something, number of comments or whatever, you have to feed the string that number from the outside. And now if I would just go here and say my variable here and concatenate the string as a string, that wouldn't work well, because then we can't localize the string generally. If you want to have your string as a pattern localizable, you should use these patterns. You should use these arguments. So the first argument will be fed to the 0 placeholder, the second argument to the 1 placeholder. So it's a print kind of string replace. We also have a neatsync. It's the plural method. Commonly in UIs, you want to have different strings if there is just one thing to mention, and a different string if there are multiple things to mention. Like you want to display there is one command, or you want to display there is a single command. But if there are multiple commands, you want to display the number. So you want to have the string as there are n commands. With plural, you can have one string for the singular version. So there is just one thing. And you can have a second version for the plural. So that's it. Let's see how this code looks actually when we run it. You see, it's just a very simple action returning a string, so no theming, nothing, just to demonstrate localization. We have our localized things here, but still in the original language. So we have to do something about this. And as we have seen, the localized strings should come from PO files. So let's write a PO file. Now, with the online localization tool, this would be easy. We just go there, fill it out, whatever, download the package, the PO file is generated. But if you have a closed source module or a module that you don't want to appear here for whatever reason, you have to edit the PO files by hand although there are two tools to overcome this. Actually, there's a kind of a neat VPF application out there. It's called Orchard Pot, but it's kind of broken, so sadly I can't demo it. And there's another third-party module. It's called DB localization or something like that, but it's also broken with 1.6. So we should have multiple tools, but for now we should edit the PO files. So let's go back to our solution folder. And this little demo module is harvest.localization. There is no localization installed in this module yet, but luckily somebody prepared that for me and placed it on my desktop, so I don't have to write everything in. So I just copy-paste it, but let's take a look what's inside. Localization packages, PO files should always reside in the app data of the module or theme or the whole application. So it's under app data, localization, the local, and here we have the PO file. This is the PO file for that little module. So if I place it side by side, it will be apparent that we have the namespace harvest.localization.controllers.homecontroller here. That's the namespace of our controller, of course. We have the original string as the message ID. So this string is localizable. That's the string here, starting here. So you get the idea. It's not very complicated. So if we go back, we should have the localized version now. Or not. Or not. And that's an interesting question. What's the issue here? Probably I have to reload the application, but it should just work. So let's try to restart the application. In my experience, these are not depending on the, so these are not loaded on the application startup, so you can change the strings pretty much live. And now it works. That was kind of different yesterday, of course. So here we have our localized string. You can see that it was, by the way, made by Google Translate, so blame Google Translate if it's not right. These are the same strings that we have in our controller. So pretty straightforward. If you are localizing views, yeah, sorry, a question there. Sorry, I can't hear you. Ilan, could we pass? Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, all right. Let's do that after, please. All right. Okay, but what if you want to localize templates? So let's open up a template. It's the same, but just to mention that as well. This is a template what I have here, a CS.html. You can see it's the same T-string. It's by default available. You don't have to do anything. You can just run your strings through that, and it's localizable. Nothing to do here. So there's an issue with some parts of Orchard, but you can't really localize because, this localizer takes the current local into account, of course, but what's fetching the strings from the PO files in the background. But if you don't have an HTTP context, then that service can't decide which local do you have. And that's an issue with migrations. So if you try to use T-strings from migrations, it won't work. It will throw an exception. That means that you can't localize from code. From the code, you can't localize content type display names, part descriptions that we have seen by Sebastian, what's new in 1.7. So there are some holes, but toStrings you can localize from the UI if you like. Now to the content. How do we localize content? It's quite simple to start as well, but it can get messy. First, there is localization part. I will demo it in a minute. If the different versions of your sites are very different, and you have to decide that somehow up front, if they are very different, so there are structural differences as well, not just small differences in the layout, you have to have a separate tenant. You are better off with that. With a separate tenant, these are like two separate orchard instances, so you don't have any limitation. You can have something completely different for one local and something completely different for another. So that's a simple way. You can't really go wrong with that if you have many differences. If you have small differences, go with localization part. And there's a very useful tool to complement the built-in localization part and localization toolbox, and that's the culture widget layer. This is done actually by two modules. I will show you one now. So let's see that's in action. I just go back to our instance. And for now, I will set it back to NUS, at least the admin UI. And how do you use localization part? It's a content part, so nothing fancy. For example, I want to localize pages. Why is it still French? Yeah, although it's NUS, it's still French. Probably it's some of the modules I already enabled in the background. Never mind. So we won't fix that bug for now. I just go to the page content type, and I will add a part called localization part. So quite a surprise. And now, since we have localization part, we can have localized versions of content items. So if I go to content, we have the default Welcome to Orchard page that's, of course, displayed on the home page. But now this adds translation link appeared, but in French. Nouvelle traduction, probably. So if I click that, I can create an equivalent content item for a given locale. Actually, this has all the locales that you have made available in this dropdown, so you can select what culture you want to target. So I will now target French. And now I will just quickly hit a means that enables me to speak. So let's do the French version. Since I don't know French, I will just indicate that it's French. So let's publish it. And now if you go to the home page, it's not displayed. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to set it to French. Then I should add another translation, and now. All right, let's go over with a new page. So that will be translation test, US. There's nothing interesting here. We publish it. And if I go back and now add really a translation, but now for French, and that will be French. Sorry? Oh, so that's, I already, that's strange. I got intimidated by the French UI. So let's have French here. And That should work. Or not. Yeah, now it's kind of properly displayed. So we have one page, that's the French one, and we have a translation, that's the NUS one. So if I open both here, that's the French and that's the US one. So let's see it on the front end. That's the US one. And the French one should be, actually it should be the same. It looks like I created two separate content items, so that's not the idea. That's kind of amusing, but it really works. But it only works if your UI is NUS. So don't try it in French, at least if you don't speak French. So that kind of sucks. But let me show you something that really works, and the culture widget layer. The culture widget layer is something that's provided to us by a third-party module. It is provided to us by two modules. There's the culture layer module, and there's the vitus.localization module. Both define a culture layer feature. What is a culture layer? The culture layer is a widget layer that you can target to specific cultures. So that's really something handy. Because with that, you can have different widgets, completely different navigation, completely different set of sidebar widgets, whatever, for a different local. And with Culture Picker, that's indeed a very useful module. You can select the culture, the current culture for the UI on the front end from a widget. So let's see those. I'll go back to our site. I already have these modules enabled. So first I will start with Culture Picker widget. I will add that to aside second, for example. And here we have the Culture Picker widget. You don't have to fill anything out because it has no configuration options. And now we have this Culture Picker here. If I select English, it should work. And it indeed works. In the English local, we have the English UI here. If I select French, it's indeed French. So let's get back to English now and see the widget layers in action. This should be now English as well. Oh, it's back to English. I will just add a new layer just for French, the French local. Let's call it FR. And the layer rule is a new syntax. With the culture layer module, you have the syntax that says lang, and you have to specify the local here. So FR. With the Vitus module, there's a slightly different syntax. It's kind of a function, but it's well documented. So let's add a widget just to the French layer. For example, to before content. And I indeed click before content. That should be just an HTML widget that this is now French. And this is really French, so if you see English here, it's not my fault. All right, let's see. We are now in the English local, so we can't see the widget anywhere. But if I go to French, it now appears here. So that's kind of handy because, especially with navigation, it's not just a content-to-content localization. With navigation, you commonly have a different structure as well, because for different cultures, you don't want to use the same tree because in the head of the different people, it's logical in a different way. So the culture layer is something really handy. There are some Other quite useful modules out there. I already mentioned Vitus.localization. It has many features. I won't demo it. For example, it has a feature where you can fetch the local from a cookie, so the user can set the local, and it will be persisted in the browser. You can define aliases for locals there. For example, you want to serve the same for NUS and NUK. You can define that as an alias. There's RM localization. It's also a big package. It has some useful features. I've mentioned Translation Manager before. It's indeed very useful. It also can extract, if it's not broken, of course, but it is sadly now, that it can extract the T strings. So we have seen that I've created that PO file by hand, but this is tedious, especially if you have many strings in your module. But that feature, Translation Manager, can take all your T strings and write it out to a PO file. So you just have to fill in the localized versions. There's this DB translations module. It's quite a nice idea, because with that, it's also currently broken, so I can't demo it. But with 1.5, it works. It used to work. You can use that to have an orchard instance where the users can localize the strings from the admin UI, and it changes live. Then you can export the whole package as PO files. So basically, you can set up an orchard size just for your translators, just for your linguistics, and they can change the localized versions of the site, and they can see everything changing live. Then you can export it, and you can deploy it to your real site. So it's quite a nice idea. I have all the links for these modules here at the end. So just for the record, when you will get these PPT, you can check them out. Quite nice modules. So that was from me. I think we have some questions. I already know one question, and I know the answer to that. So I hope that will be
the question was back here, well. Or the first question?
I saw you had something with count as 2 and then translate plural.
What do you mean?
In your controller, you had a count as 2 and then you translated t.plural, but it had the wrong translation.
Really? Let's check it
those
out.
middle 2 lines.
Where is that? Yeah. Which one is wrong here?
The last sentence. It says.
Il a une chose. Well, indeed. We have the count 2 here, and it used singular one.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. You have sharp eyes. Indeed, it's a problem, and that's also something that that used to work yesterday. Of course. But if you check the API out, the first argument here is the singular, so it should work. I have no idea why it isn't working now.
More questions?
First, a very basic question. When you use the translation, does it then include in the HTML that the language used is the different language? Because if you want to optimize your search results, you don't want to say that your French content is English, for instance.
Indeed. So it should be included, and it is. So I'm just looking at the source generated. Mm-hmm. You can see the language header is the language HTML header is that.
Okay. Next question. In many languages, people, particularly women, don't like it when they are dressed like men. And typically that is part of internationalization and then localization. So the question is, do you provide functionality to address people for who they are?
Yeah, so that's something that's not handled by Orchard, and I don't really think it should be handled. So I don't know such languages, so I can't speak of an experience or personal knowledge. But if you have such issues, probably it's best to somehow have some gender-neutral default version, and you can then go if you know the gender of the user, because for that, I guess the question is about if you know the gender of the user, speak them with the proper gender, right?
If you know the gender, yes.
Yeah. So if you know the gender from whatever source, then you can, as a workaround, use that as a different local. So you can have a completely different local for the male and female versions, because that's something very similar to the informal and polite versions. That's not perfect.
You don't want to do that. If your language is English, it's English. If it's German, it's German. If it's formal, it's still German, for instance.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's not something held out of the box. So this would be some simple solution, although messy. You can make the differences at the code level, but that needs you to write the actual code. So actually display a different string for the two genders, and then you will have different translations to these different strings.
Right. One plug then, there is a jQuery module called, what's it called? Milkshake, and that does all these things for you, and have a look at that. Thanks.
Thanks.
In the context of the previous question, I was wondering if there's a kind of way to define hierarchies of languages, because the way you said now with the gender-specific versions, it would be great to have like a default French and then a French 1, French 2, whatever. I mean, because otherwise you would have to copy all resources, right? All the PO files into the locales. That's how it would work. I mean, it's flat, right? There's no hierarchy, or is there a chance for that?
Yeah, it is flat. So to my knowledge, this is... no, it is not flat, and Sebastian will explain why.
So yeah, if there is a dedicated, a specific local like en-us, it takes this one. If it doesn't find it, and it will look in the en file, and then again at the top and the top and the top. So yeah, there is a hierarchy. You're so wrong.
I also learned something now.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, it's about same style of question, but it's about the browser culture, the web browser culture. Is it supported in in one of the modules or something like that?
Yeah, it is. I think it's probably rm.localization, but I'm not sure. But it is supported, so yeah, it is supported in that module.
Other questions?
Yeah, one more on the plurality. In the natural range of numbers, there's 0, 1, and more than 1. So, shall we have an extension overload for 0?
Yeah, I think there is an already open issue report for that, because somebody already needed it.
I just wanted to comment on the remark, which was that the current implementation is wrong. There is there are 2 overloads. There should be as many overloads as we want, because some languages have more than 2 versions of plurals. Russian has 6 versions, something like that. And some languages have 3, 4, 5. So for instance, in some languages you have one string for 0, one for 1, one for 2, one for 10 to 15, one for 20 and 21. Yeah, Russian is like that, I think, something like that. So it's more complex than what we have implemented, and we have to work on open implementations of plurals. So yeah, today it's wrong. It doesn't handle all languages.
Do we have any sense how many Orchard users are using the localization aspects of it? Like what percent or what number? Like,
I don't know of such a statistics. I guess if you look at how many strings are localized on the localization tool, you kind of could get an idea of what are the most popular ones, or at least the most dedicated ones. But I don't know of such a statistics. Probably we could just kind of answer that with a quick Google query by searching for the powered by Orchard string in different locals.
Yeah, so who here has used these PO files?
Yeah, quick statistics.
Okay. Who here has contributed? Could get a little bit more hands on that one next time, maybe, yeah? Okay.
In the afternoon, probably.
Any other questions?
Is there any kind of supported version for any PO file that you can download here? I mean, maybe, I don't know, the strings from the original source code in this string could change of meaning between versions of Orchard.
Yeah, these packages here are incremental. So if you download one, it includes the first version of every string as well. So it is backwards compatible, but not forwards. So indeed, if the ID, the original string changes, it's an issue. We already have some discrepancies because of that. Then you have to retranslate it. But there's no support for a version-specific PO file here out of the box.
Any more questions? Last question.
Is it possible to set up the culture into the URL? So you have a string with en of the Dutch NL, and then the rest of the URL?
So the question is about setting the local by the URL.
Yeah. Yeah.
That should be quite simply possible with an iCulture selector. I don't know if any of these modules have support for that, but just to take a quick glance what the magic behind this is. There is a service called, or there is an interface called iCulture selector. So basically, if you want to have some custom logic that should decide what culture your current page should have, you just have to implement this interface. All these iCulture selectors will be taken into account. They have priorities, so if there are multiple ones deciding something for the same page, the priority they will be ordered by priority. So you could, if there's no existing implementation, you could write such an iCulture selector implementation and look at the URL. If you have the segment that's responsible for the culture, just set the culture and return it here from this method through this object.
Okay, thank you very much.